welcome to the Art of Being Human. Today I'm going to start off by talking about the different forms of medications that we take. Now, medications are produced in different forms, you know, gels and pills and syrups and ointments and so forth. And the reason for that is the fact that they want to preserve the amounts of dosages of drugs that you're supposed to get in you, and also for the ease of getting them in you and the ease of getting them to the places where they're supposed to be. Some pills you have to take internally because they have to go through the circulatory system. You know, the reason why they can't give insulin by medication, they have to do it by shots. The reason for that is the fact that it would digest in the digestive system, and then by the time it got to the blood, it would no longer be useful in terms of controlling blood sugar. It would be just another substance that had been digested and filtered out of the system by the kidneys and the liver. So therefore, you have to take it in shot form. There isn't any other way, although there are ways of checking your blood sugar now where you don't have to stab yourself and get blood samples for a meter. There's a new meter out that you can take and just scan your finger. You have a little sensing device that looks like a Band-Aid or looks like a quarter, depending upon what you get, and it's on your skin, usually on your elbow or on your upper arm, and you take the instrument, you take the meter, and you hover over that without even sticking your finger at all. It will immediately read your blood sugar. And the good thing about it is that it will track it. I mean, it's like it's on an internal graph and it will track it. But some people can't use it. They're allergic to the adhesive tape, like myself. They tried it on me and I couldn't use it because the adhesive tape has to hold the sensor on. And if you have skin problems and allergies with skin problems, you can't use it. There are other meters that are so precise, they're like little computers. You put in, you actually put in what you want to put in terms of carbs that you're going to be taking, and then it will formulate what you should take for insulin according to what your blood sugar number is. So you put in the carbs, and then it takes your blood sugar, it tells you what the blood sugar is, and then it does its own formulation in terms of how much insulin you should be taking. Very handy if you tend to guess what you should need. This is all very precise. I have one of those, and it's been very helpful to me. So at any rate, there are ways of getting medications in you that will preserve the dosage strength and that will get it to the right place at the right time, and it won't go through a process that will destroy it before it gets to the place where it's supposed to be. Now, this is going to be very common. I'm going to list these things on and describe what they are. You already kind of know, but there are little differences that you might be interested in. A tablet is a solid dosage. You take the drug and it's solid, you just swallow it. Capsules, there is a gelatin scale, and you swallow the gelatin product, and that releases the drug into your system. Liquids, of course, you can have a different kind of liquid. You can have a mixture, which is one or more drugs, and it is dissolved in a solution. An elixir, which is also a solution, but it contains flavoring with it. And it also may have alcohol and sugar in it as well, and that's usually listed, contains some alcohol, but it's in a form where it gets into your system. Emulsion is a drug that's suspended in oil and water. And a syrup is a solution of sugar plus the drug, so it tends to be very sweet. Now, there are also skin preparations. Creams are non-greasy and they will absorb. Ointments are greasy and they won't absorb, which makes you wonder why you use them, but at any rate, there is a purpose in ointments. Lotions are for unbroken skin. They cool and they dry the area as you're taking the meds. You also have suppositories, eye drops, ear drops, nasal sprays, and inhalers. And inhalers, the medication, of course, is under pressure. Now, you have to be careful of the drugs because children and adults don't react the same. When you're dealing with a child, the amount of drug that the child gets depends upon how much they weigh, how old they are, what is their size, how tall they are, because they're a smaller version of the human adult, and so therefore they can't take as much. Their systems can't handle as much. Also, children tend to react differently to drugs than adults do. In fact, a lot of times they act opposite of what adults do. An adult will take a drug that would calm them down, but it might make a child jittery. If you give a child a drug that'll calm them down, it might make the adult jittery, because the brain and the way the brain is developing, the body and the way the body is growing, it just does not react the same to medications as adults do. Organs of the body can react differently. Pregnancy also affects drugs, and you don't want to take anything that's going to harm a fetus. You don't want to have anything in your system that's going to harm the baby. It may be good for the mother, it may be toxic to the baby. So there are certain types of medications that a mother who has not delivered a baby yet cannot take because of damage to the infant or the baby. So pregnancy does affect drugs in the way that they're metabolized. In terms of the elderly, sometimes they don't react the same to medications as younger adults do. So that has to be taken into consideration. The body is different. The body processes things a little differently. The organs don't act exactly the same. That's a part of the aging process. That all has to be taken into consideration. And sometimes an elderly person can take the same drug as a younger person, but they can't take the same amount of it. So that all has to be judged by the physician. Some drugs cause physical and emotional dependency. Some drugs cannot be tolerated because of side effects. The person may not be allergic to it, but the side effects may be so terrible that they can't tolerate it. They can't take it either. And then, of course, you have some drugs that you're allergic to. Now, some drugs, if you're allergic, it may not show up right away. You can take a drug for a week, and maybe you've never taken it before, and so your body hasn't had a chance to develop antibodies to it, and then suddenly on the second or the third week of taking the drug, you start to get the symptoms that you are allergic to it. That can happen quite a bit. So the body has now had a chance to respond and decided that it really doesn't want it, and so therefore you start to get allergic reactions. If you get an allergic reaction, you must report that to the doctor immediately, because an allergic reaction can put you into anaphylactic shock, in which you're not breathing right, you're not swallowing right, and it actually can kill you. So when you start to get an allergic reaction, immediately contact your doctor. This is what happens when I take the drug. I'm breaking out in a rash. And that's usually the first sign of going into anaphylaxis if you are truly allergic to the drug. Sometimes it doesn't get any worse than that, but sometimes it goes deeper and deeper, and a person can actually die in shock. They can't breathe, they can't swallow, and that kind of thing. So you have to be very careful if you're a doctor as how you give medications out. Some drugs are formulated in different ways than other drugs. Different companies will work with a drug in a different kind of way. So that brings me up to the generic drugs and the brand name drugs. What's the difference between them? The generic drugs are cheaper, definitely cheaper, but they have the same active ingredient, and so therefore should act the same way. And usually they do. Usually you can take a generic drug and get the same effects as you could a brand name drug and be just as well off at a less expensive price. However, some people's bodies don't react that way. The drugs are formulated different, they are processed in a different way, there are different fillers holding them together, and as a result, some people do not do so well on generic drugs, but they have to have the original brand name drug to do well, because there is a difference, not in the active ingredient, but in how it's processed and with the fillers that are used. I had a doctor once that would not allow any of his patients to use generic drugs. He thought they should only use the brand name drugs. The problem is the brand name drugs were so expensive that patients couldn't afford to buy them, but they would be able to afford to buy the generics. There was that much difference. And so I remember before an eye surgery that I had, the doctor said, we do not want generics. So when I went to fill a prescription, I said, what about the generic? Because it was over $300 for some drops or something for my eye. And they said, we can't do it because your doctor doesn't allow it. My sister and I searched all the way up and down the coast of Maine and New Hampshire until we found a pharmacy that actually could get an original for us, because they just didn't sell it. It was so expensive that everyone came in and they wanted the generics, and for most doctors that was fine. But they never sold the brand name because it was way too expensive. So we had to really hunt it up. So I wanted to tell a doctor, look, if you're going to tell us that we have to have a brand name drug and not the generic, then you're going to have to point us to a pharmacy that actually sells it. Because we spent the better part of a day just trying to find a pharmacy, and most of them would refuse because they wouldn't carry the expensive kind because no one could take it. So therefore, what they did was they only sold the generics, and by the time they would order a regular brand name drug, the surgery would have been over with, because I could only take it for like 3 or 4 days before the surgery began. So you run into complications like this. So prescriptions, what does a prescription do? When a doctor writes a prescription, it tells the pharmacist the drug, the amount of the drug, with instructions as to how to use it. And it used to be that there was the prescription pad, you know, and they were like about this big, and they would just write it on, sign their names, and you took it to a pharmacy yourself and they filled it, and that was it. Now they fax all of their prescriptions in, and they're usually at least a page long. I know because I've seen them. You know, there's a whole 8.5 by 10 page, and it has all kinds of stuff on it, and the doctor signs his name, and then there's a little pink spot, and that pink spot, if you put your finger on it, changes color. And that proves that that's the original prescription, because an ordinary piece of paper, even if it was a colored piece of paper, would not have the same reaction. So it's all in terms of trying to protect drugs from getting into the wrong hands. So if you have a drug and you don't usually take it yourself into the pharmacy, it gets faxed in, and the original gets faxed in, and then with that little pink spot, all they have to do is touch it in case they get the original prescription and not just a fax. Then they will know it's an original prescription, because that little pink oval on the bottom of the page actually changes color. It seems like a really precise, long kind of way in order to produce drugs, in order to be able to make sure they're in the wrong hands, but that's what it is. And so therefore it gets to be more complicated. Now, taking too much or too little of a drug can be a problem, because the organs are now affected. Every drug that you take is going to affect your organs somehow. Every drug that you put in your system is going to change your physiology somehow, not necessarily on a permanent basis, but on some kind of a basis so that you feel better. So you're either getting something that you lack, and they're producing something to put into your system because you don't have enough of it, whatever it is, like vitamin B or something like that. People could take vitamin B shots. Or there are other reasons why you have to have the drug, and it does certain things. It may stop a metabolic process. It may stop pain. It may relieve something that you're suffering from, so you're no longer suffering from it, at least not as intensely. Or it may fight an infection, like an antibiotic would. Antibiotics you have to be careful of too, because a lot of people are allergic to them. And then there are some antibiotics that are prone to give you very severe digestive problems, and I'm talking about C. diff. C. diff is something I'd never heard of until fairly recently, but it's a very, very bad problem with the intestines where you have very severe diarrhea. It does not stop, and you're prone to get it if you're on antibiotics. So if you're on antibiotics, usually a doctor will tell you to take probiotics with it because that'll normalize the intestinal flora, and so therefore you're not so likely to get the C. diff. There are some antibiotics that are more prone to giving you C. diff than others, but what happens is that as you're killing off the bad bacteria, if you have an infection in your intestines or a digestive problem, but it's also killing off the good bacteria. So the probiotics are supposed to replace, especially if it's a live thing, it's supposed to replace and keep your bowels normalized so you don't have that reaction of getting C. diff, which is very, very difficult to get rid of, and some people actually die of it, and they're hospitalized, and sometimes they're in the hospital for quite a while, but it's very difficult to get rid of C. diff. So when I ever take an antibiotic, I ask, is this prone to cause C. diff? I've never had it, but I know people that have, and they've gone through terrible times with it. As I said, it's very, very difficult to get rid of. So drugs that are taken in the mouth are processed in the liver, and they're eliminated by the kidneys. Well, if you have a kidney problem or a liver problem, that's going to be a problem because your liver may not be able to process it, or your kidneys may not be able to flush it out. And so therefore it builds up to a much higher level than it should in your tissues. And so therefore there are medical problems associated with that as well. If the liver is damaged, it cannot process the drug right. If the kidneys are damaged, it cannot eliminate right. And so therefore, you can have problems in getting too high a level of the medication in your tissues and in your bloodstream because those two organs working together cannot take care of what the problem will be. So that's what you need to remember. Now I'm going to read you something, and it's about, from the perspective of a person, I don't know who wrote it, but it's from a perspective of a person who is now addicted to a drug and how their attitudes have changed. And I'm assuming it would be like an illicit drug, a street drug, or something like that, but that's not made clear. And you have to be careful of drugs anyway, because there are some you can get dependent on fairly easily. So this is what this person supposedly said. I am your child or spouse or friend, but I've changed. I don't belong to you anymore. I don't care about you. I care about getting high. I want to get high. I need to get high, and I will step over you to do it. When I look at you, I don't see you. I see a means to an end. You have money, I want it. I don't care if you can't pay the rent. I don't care if you're broke. Sell your rings. Take a loan. If you don't, I will steal it. I will find a way to get high. You think you can change me? You're wrong. Something cold slithers in me. Your tears won't change anything. I have no integrity or values. My morals are a thing of the past. I will do anything to get my fix. If we keep going like this, one or both of us will die. Your world revolves around one thing, me. I lay trapped within the confines of this cold, dark serpent, addiction, and I am dying. That's the way this individual, the writer, wrote. And I'm not saying they were the ones that were addicted, but they're trying to write from the perspective of a person who is addicted, how they feel, how they act. And so therefore, we have to be so careful of drugs because it does lead to addiction. And I'm not saying every aspirin, every Sudafed, or anything like that leads to addiction. But if you overuse any kind of a drug, you can get into real trouble because it changes your body. And if you're taking a drug that is addictive, whether it's prescription, although they usually don't allow much of that on the market because that's why you have the drug schedules, and that's why some drugs don't actually get sold. They have to be classified, but they don't get sold. It's the schedule of the drug depends upon how easily it is for a person to become dependent or become addicted. And you know, you can become addicted to almost anything if you take it long enough. Now, what I want to do now, I'll start it, but I think I won't be able to finish it right now. I'll have to go on to the next segment. But what I want to do is give you a list of commonly used drugs. These drugs may be over the counter. These drugs may be prescription drugs. These lists of drugs also include illicit street drugs. How do you know if you're taking enough that you're beginning to overdose? What are the symptoms of overdose or damage if you take too much of the drug? And so, you know, I think what I'll do is I'll just do this on the next segment because it will take me time to get through it. And it may seem a little boring because I'm going to list the drug. If you're starting to overdose, this is what's going to happen to you. This is what you're going to feel. These are what your symptoms are going to be. And I want you, even though it may be a little boring when I do it on the next segment, I want you to pay attention to it because you may be taking some of these drugs and they may be perfectly legitimate for you to take them. Or you may have friends that are taking them and you're noticing changes in their behavior. And what can you do to help them? How would you know that they're overdosing? How would you know they're on a drug to begin with? Well, there are ways to tell, a lot of times by the symptoms that they're exhibiting. So what I want to do, and we'll do this next segment, give you a list of these drugs, and some of them are just common drugs that people take for their health. It's not necessarily anything that you wouldn't be taking. And what happens if you overdose? So I'm going to go through a whole list of them. So we'll close it here, and this is what I'll be doing next time. Please join me then.